Okay, so this video we're looking at the bending movement pattern. One of the most difficult ones for most people to get right. If you're anyone who's suffering with back pain, there's a high chance you've got a real problem with this particular pattern of movement, and you're really going to have to spend time to work it out. You can't ignore this movement pattern. This is just like the squat. I would really say this is the one that I see most of the problems with lower limbs and back, and it's the one thing they need to do to get rid of it. So firstly, this exercise here is you're just using the foam roller to get rid of any trigger points that may be hiding within the posterior part of the glutes here, and it's people with gripping problems, locked up hips because they don't use them properly. You can guarantee there's going to be some stiffness and some trigger points to release. So crossing the leg over here really opens up the muscle fibers of the glutes so you can really get underneath into the more hidden ones. Some people might have issues in the middle of the glute there. Some people there might be a little bit on the side, so they might have to move around to the side a little bit and roll across the glute medius, maybe on the outer part of the hip. My suggestion is to explore, look around for where there may be stiffness for you. These exercises are great to use between sets of the more advanced ones that we show you later, so just to make sure that you've got the mobility to be able to bend correctly. Like we've seen with all the other patterns, mobility, you must ensure that you've got it, because without it you won't be able to do the movement correctly. So here's like a stretch that follows up from that. So some people might benefit more from the stretch than the foam roller. So this is just a simple 90-90 or glute stretch. Some people would prefer to do it this way. Some people might find it locks up the hip on the left leg there. But basically all you're trying to do is just get this leg into 90-90 position. The other leg sometimes can be 90. Mel finds it locks up her left leg, so she'll straighten that leg out behind. That's fine. Do what works for you. And once you're in that position, you're just basically trying to bend forward. So she's trying to get her trunk to come forward, but only go as far as she can where she can still keep her neutral part of her back there. All right. So very simple exercise, helps her to release any stiffness in the posterior chain so that she can bend correctly when we need her to do it when she's standing. Now, before we get to the standing, we're going to actually follows up after the glute one. Some people may actually need to release the hamstrings. I don't always use this. I find usually the glutes and the hips are the bigger problem, but some people will really need to do this, and this is the simplest way and the safest way to stretch your hamstring, by the way. Always do this lying down. Don't do those hurdler stretches, and that's just where she can keep her back neutral, especially the lumbar spine here. With her knee slightly bent, it gets the hamstring muscle. If she straightens the leg out, it's going to be a sciatic nerve stretch. Sometimes that's okay, so she's straightening her leg there a little bit, but it's still partially bent, which is what we would want it to see like when we're doing the Romanian deadlift. The only thing with these stretches, these lying stretches, probably stretches the hamstring more at the insertion and not where it's really tight, which is up near the top end. So if I wanted to get the top end, I would just bend her knee more and get her to flex the hip further. I would actually bring her knee to there and have her like that, and then we would get a greater stretch through the hip end of the hamstring. But we'll be able to do that more effectively once we stand. Right, so the hamstring stretch, that's the easiest way to do it, the resistance band or maybe even a towel wrapped around your foot. All right, so very, very simple. Again, I could use this in between sets. I probably prefer to do the 90-90 stretch or the foam rolling to keep the hamstrings not weakened too much, because I'm definitely going to need them when I'm standing. Now that we've done the mobility side of things, we'll approach a basic stability exercise, and this one's just the standard bridge exercise that most people are familiar with. The way I like to do this, and I use this as a test with many people on the first day, is I do this as a single leg exercise. So basically they'll come up, and you'll see Mel had a cramp in the left leg then, so that's a perfect example of where the glutes have failed. So all she has to do is, and we'll see this a little bit better when she goes more from a side-on angle, is when she pushes her butt up in the air, we just need her to hold that position nice and stable and still. So she just needs to stay in a straight line. Don't overarch the back. So some people will come up too high. Don't do that. Just stay in this nice straight line, and then your job is to keep this pelvis square. So when she extends one leg, we don't want to see any part of the pelvis drop to do so. So it's on her weaker leg, and you see it did drop a little bit, not too bad, and then she'll just lower her butt down to reset, come back up and do the other leg. So she'll hold here, and then you'll see that left leg extends, and what you're looking for is to see if this side drops. If this butt has got any sort of a weakness, the pelvis will shift. All right, and if that happens on this one, it's definitely going to happen when they stand. All right, so this is a great one for people to work on in the beginning to build some really basic strength and learning pelvic control before they get to the more tricky ones, especially the single leg ones that we'll get to. All right, so far we've worked on mobility and basic stability. Now we've got to work on the coordination of the pattern itself. So before I start to stand, especially with people with back pain and sciatica in particular, I just physically cannot get into that position of bending correctly because the sciatic nerve's under so much tension. I'll start in this position with a lot of these people where they're learning to stick their butt behind them and not bend their spine. See how she's stuck her butt right backwards to there, and her spine stayed in neutral there, especially that lumbar spine. So when she comes forward, she's learning to use her hips to stand upright, and she's using her hips to bend over and not her spine. All right, so because a lot of people will keep the hips here and just bend forward like so. All right, so we're trying to get that sort of faulty movement, that faulty coordination, and keeping the spine in neutral. And so there's very little risk with this. All right, there's no strength required. This is a stability coordination of retraining the pattern. All right, so if they make mistakes here, it's not disaster. Or if I stand up, I can put problems through the discs if they've got a bulging disc or something like that. All right, so once I've got the idea of that, I've got the mobility working on, I've got the stability, coordination's partly there. Now I've got to try and put it all together in the standing one. And this is where, now because we've added the rest of the legs to the equation, it's a lot harder. I've done many videos on this before, so you can see, basically I'll just go over what I'm looking for again. I want to see the shin stays vertical, the lumbar spine stays in neutral. All right, I don't even need them to pick it up. I just need them to touch the handle to begin with. All right, so it's not about strength. It's just about getting the pattern right and learning positioning and total control. Once they can demonstrate that they can do that, then I'll start to bring in the part where they can pick the kettle, in this case the kettlebell up, which brings into play some strength element. So this is the first time I'm bringing in strength. This is not really heavy enough to challenge people completely yet, but it sets the foundation to get to the next part where they will. So I can really work in this phase of teaching them good bracing and breathing skills to create intra-abdominal pressure so that when they pick the heavy object up, they don't buckle, so that when they get to this point here, that we don't see the weight overpower them and they pop out the back and there goes their discs. I can really practice this on this lightweight so that when we get to the next one where we really do develop the strength on its true potential, that we won't see that problem happen. All right, so some people could get stuck in that point for quite some time. And again, I would use the foam rolling and 90-90 stretch between sets just to ensure that the mobility is there, especially if they were lacking it at the start. So once you've got that one down right, obvious progression is just to add load. So my preferred choice is the trap bar. It just gives better leverage than a traditional barbell. You just got much more, it just minimises the risk. I can go with a lot greater load with the least amount of risk. All right, so again, it's the same action as we just saw on the previous one. There's nothing different, just the hand position's different and the barbell weighs a lot more. All right, so again, really learning how to brace correctly here on this one is crucial, and just getting your technique down pat. And then you really probably, as far as I need to go with most people in terms of just really trying to get the most strength out of it, I don't really need to make it too much more advanced with Olympic lifting, and that most people just don't require that. But there isn't a few other progressions that I will add to this that start to include different movement patterns, and that's when it starts to get a bit messy. The only one that probably is harder than this, but it's lighter, is the single leg one, which is Mel's going to use our kettlebell again. And in this kettlebell, again, I'm not actually going to pick it up. I'm just going to use it as a guide to breach to, just like we did with the first one with the two legs. As you get better at, obviously you can pick this up, or I could use two dumbbells in the hand, but basically the single leg, we want the same position of the shin and the spine as before. just being single leg brings the frontal plane into it a lot more. So this is where the first time people really notice just how much their glutes are on the job when they're in a single leg stance. So, and a lot of people with knee pain really struggle with these exercises. They just don't have the control, and also the foot starts to become an element here as well. So if you've got poor foot stability, you wouldn't have seen it till now, but you will in this one. All right, so again, huge recruitment through the hamstrings and glutes in this. This is really where all the power and the engine room of your strength is being developed. An absolute crucial exercise for everyone to get up to, especially if you've got like knee problems or any lower limb problem or a walking dysfunction. You really need to get good at this one because it's really the stance phase of the walking pattern. And that brings into play the next one, which is where we start to get into so this is arguably, the single leg one is arguably a gait pattern exercise as much as bending. It's probably more to do with gait. This next one, the suitcase carry, again, it's just really loading one side. And I've done many videos on this recently about the value of using this with lateral pelvic tilts and glute medius dysfunctions and all types of problems we see with people with hip issues causing back problems or knee problems. And the bending pattern is crucial to this. So, because you can see arguably this is a gait pattern, but this is where we're really picking it up. And on this one, Mel makes a bit of mistake with her left leg. You can see how her left leg's a weak leg there. So we didn't see her make that mistake on the other ones, but with this unnatural, imbalanced exercise, it really exposes the weak side. So we know we have to work on single leg stuff more with her, because that left side is the weakest link as such. All right, so there's our suitcase carry, a great exercise for building bending pattern or simultaneously gait. The last one is very sort of more of a sporting one, and this brings in a different movement pattern in combination with bending, and it's lunging this time. So this is where we see like a lunge to begin with, but then it goes into a bending position, and then we even add a third thing being a pulling pattern. So this is like multiple patterns being used at the same time. We are using a bit of a multi-directional lunge here, so bending down on an angle, bending forward, and then going into the lateral lunge on the next one. And it very much for sports, this one. So this is where like tennis players, moving laterally and then having to bend to reach the ball, drop shots. But you would see the same thing in basketball, soccer, tennis, not tennis, but other sports, football, where you're seeing the athletes having to bend and move in multiple directions. All right, so this is really training that bending pattern to be in an athletic sort of movement. So you've got this sort of huge lateral lunge happening. So it's very complicated. All right, but again, I wouldn't need this for the everyday person, but for a person playing sports, it's definitely something I need to work on, and I really need to see the bending pattern executed perfectly. You can see the nice bending action there, so she's not in that horrible where she's using her spine to bend. All right, so that gives you an example how I might progress this bending pattern. Obviously, there's a ton more exercises that I've left out, but this just gives you an idea of how I gradually progress, and depending on the person, where I might head to. Again, the more violently powerful ones in this come with a huge degree of risk. So your Olympic lifts and things like that, they're definitely got a bending pattern with explosive power, but again, the risk I find with most people is not worth it. If you really don't need to do this with many people unless it's needed for their sport or their activity. All right, so hope you enjoy that, and we'll see you the next one.